Welcome to Inference Swap, hosted by InferenceSwap.com. I'm your host, John Pappas, with my co-host, Chris Moranis, and we're here to bring good news and get you to disciple. That's our whole job. And to break down some inferences along the way and some presuppositions. We want to thank you guys for joining us today. And also, we want to thank Barney's Hub Bootery, 1198 North Main Street, who helps sponsor this podcast, keeps us on the air. And we want to encourage you to become a premium member. Premium membership gets audiobooks and other resources that will help you understand the gospel better, understand discipleship, and we want to encourage you to join in on that. And who knows, maybe me and Chris might do a special premium podcast because we can. But anyway, welcome back to the podcast. We are on episode 10, and we are back looking at this book that has dived in deep to the mystery of Christ, called The Mystery of Christ, and Why People Don't Get It by Robert Farrar Capon. And I'm here with my co-host, my man, the Mr. Knowledge, we call him, Chris Moranis. What's up, homeboy?
Hey, how's it going, John?
We are back for another counseling session, if you want to call this a counseling session. And we're just going to see what happens today, you know. It's pretty crazy how this book has just sort of opened up the gospel. Last week was a great podcast. I want to encourage those who didn't hear it to go back and check it out, as it sort of summed up the first, 6 chapters or whatever it was.
The first half of the book.
Yeah, first half of the book, and now we're in the second half. So, you want to set the tone for this one?
Sure. This is going to be, I guess, what we're going to find out initially is this is going to be more what you would think of like a typical counseling session.
Yeah.
So we have a recent widow named Mabel who is requested by her friend to visit with Mr. Capon and just discuss the recent passing of her husband and just what's going on with that. And of course, that's always just the surface. There's always so much more going on that we're going to get into. So we're going to get into grief. We're going to get into guilt. We're going to get into forgiveness, as that seems to be a constant theme, this idea of forgiveness. So
absolutely. And what just to hit it off, what sort of hit you hard in about any of this? Did anything just jump out at you? Or should we talk about what Mabel's going through first? What do you think?
Yeah, the stuff that kind of hit me comes from the next chapter. Once our participants, Frank, Louis, Eloise, and all them chime in. Yeah. So we could definitely get kind of settled into what's going on with Miss Mabel here.
Yeah. So Mabel comes in. She's not a believer. She's actually a psychologist. Yeah. Her husband was a historian.
Right.
So they're academics, don't believe in God that much, have this sort of general understanding of Christianity, as most people in America do. And she's grieving, and he comes to, I can't remember how long he's been dead, but it's been a while.
Only like 5 months or
was
something.
It 5 months?
Yeah, it's not like a couple of days, but it wasn't years and years. If I remember correctly, it was a couple of months.
So her husband dies, and to set that up is she goes on, they still, even though they're older, they still have their separate lives, and she was going on some kind of psychology trip.
Yeah.
And once she's gone, he passes away. Right? Basically. And now she's finding herself alone and crying and can't sort of let things go. And the more she sort of dives into how this happened and what happened, she begins to hold, or I guess dig into an understanding that she thinks that there was foul play.
Yeah. And that definitely is where she's getting this idea of resentment, and things like that are coming from it. Because basically what happened is, it appears that they did not have a super deep, intimate relationship, that they seem to have kind of this very professional life that they were still a part of. And so she's out at a psychologist or psychiatric conference, and while she's away, her husband has a heart murmur, basically. He goes into the hospital, realizes nothing seems to be apparently wrong. So they both decide that she's going to stay. Well, he ends up having a massive heart attack while in the hospital and dies while she's away. And so, like you're talking about, she suspects foul play. You find out that not only is she dealing with just the grief of her husband, she now suspects that maybe the doctors didn't do something that caused his death. So she's pursuing even legal matters. She's meeting with a lawyer and all these other things, and
That's right.
Accuses them of essentially medical malpractice. Is what she's going after.
She's going after negligence, and the weird thing is, the lawyers are looking into it and they're finding nothing.
Right.
It's just they're basically saying move on. They're basically saying there's nothing there. And so instead of letting it go, she's going to go get more lawyers.
Right, right, yeah.
And so the grieving process that she's going through, her friends are saying, you need to go see this priest called Robert Farrar Capon, right? And so that's sort of what happens. And he sort of gets right to it. In my view, don't you think he sees sort of through what's going on here.
Typical Capon.
Yeah. And what's interesting, he doesn't play the psychological games that people play. He doesn't get into the psychology, or he spots grief, and he spots a chance to present faith. And I think that's, for me, just to start, we could start there. And I know this isn't really what the chapter's about, but I do think it's important to notice, because we talk about gospel and we haven't talked about discipleship a lot.
Right.
But the question is, what is, like when we get into discipling and what that means, what I would call that is more of a lifestyle than just a thing that we do when a church has an activity, right? Like I think disciples look for opportunities to bring good news, look for opportunities to, when people start sharing and are opening up about their lives, to bring who God is into that situation. Mm-hmm. In other words, and I think he would put it as faith. How do we give them an opportunity to believe and cut through some of the BS that they are believing that isn't true? And I think this is where, in my experience of dealing with people, I think if you sit down and talk to anybody that you care to talk to long enough, and this is the problem why discipleship isn't happening, because we don't care. We care about people believing what we believe. We care about them being part of our church. And of course, I'm being a little generic in this, but the first part of Jesus' discipleship was, for God so loved. Like, he came to us. We're celebrating Christmas. Mm-hmm. He came to us because he loved us, not because we were targets to get into his system, but because he loved us. And why I'm saying is that's what Jesus did. He went from place to place, conversation to conversation, and he was evangelical. He was good news. Mm-hmm. You get what I'm saying? So this is where Capon really hits hard with me, is he sees this problem and he looks for an opportunity to help her, but not in the way she's thinking.
Right.
Like although psychology is a fantastic degree, and you got to be pretty smart to do it. We think that these little degrees have all the answers, and really, they have answers. But the answer, at least to me, is God, is what Christ did. And when we believe about God wrong, then we live wrong. We have the wrong presuppositions, and we take that into everyday life and everyday relationships. And that's what I see in her. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I don't know. She really doesn't seem to know what to expect when she meets him, because she definitely seems a little reluctant to even talk to him at first, because she starts off with, my friend told me I need to come talk to you kind of thing. Right. And so she doesn't have that typical, what you might think of, catastrophic life event where she is seeking him to kind of fill in all those issues she has. She's just this, from what we can understand, just going with the whim of what a friend said. And so I don't know what she really was expecting walking in, but he
You didn't find her to be haughty?
No, she definitely was, yeah.
Oh.
But he lets her know up front, like, you're the psychologist. I'm not going to throw some psychological bibble babble at you.
Right.
We're like, here, that's your field. I'm not going to try to act like I'm confident in it. I'm going to tell you what I am confident in.
Yeah, he's going to tell her what he's there for.
Yeah.
And the real reason she's there. And this is where I think we as Christians, I think me and you've talked about it. I mean, we could talk about apologetics here.
Right.
You know what I mean? I love apologetics. You love apologetics. Me and you could sit here on this mic and talk apologetics for a long time about a lot of different topics. But it's interesting how it's different points in time we both came into this realization that we don't know if that's the best way to present the gospel. It may be a way.
Right.
But when you're talking to normal everyday people, well, I'm not sure that getting into every in-depth point in every field of science in psychology and all these different things, and philosophy, and you know what I'm saying, that is the answer to what people really need. And I think this is where Capin's really good at, is he gets beyond the psychobabble, beyond trying to meet her and get her to question her psychological beliefs in that system. He gets to the point of faith by bringing good news into this conversation, and she's very reluctant. You know what I'm saying? So I think, like if we were going to talk about discipleship, the point I'm getting at is we have to, one, be able to bring good news into the conversation without challenging everything they believe, but maybe that doesn't mean it's not shocking, right? When you say,
sure.
when you talk about the kind of gospel that we're talking about, it's shocking to religious people, let alone non-religious people. But you can bring who God is and what He's done on our behalf into this conversation that brings about faith. And I love the way he termed some things. I don't know if you caught on to this, but we're in a battle of two worlds, basically, is what he's saying. There's the world as we know it with its set of rules, and then it's sort of God's world where freedom lies outside those set of rules. You get what I'm saying? And so as faith sort of jumps you out of the standards and rules of today in this, like what would we call it, the natural world,
sure,
into the mystery of Christ, into faith, into what God has done, why He's done it, who He's done it for, and who we are because of it. And I think these are the things that hit home with people in everyday conversation as we're listening and trying to disciple. Now, I'm also defining discipleship as having conversations with people that don't necessarily believe or outside of our church. Or what church is a great thing, but discipleship starts with these conversations outside of these people that are that definitely can sharpen us and definitely can help us. But so I just thought like that. When I hear him speak, that really hit home for me. Did that do any? Did you catch on to that? Or
yeah, he does use the more common, church language of new creation. I think is where he's going at with that is, that what we're trying to do is not give you some new set of belief system, but we're actually trying to expose you to a new to not a new reality, but to the only reality that there ever was. And realizing that we are looking through a stained glass mirror, not able to see. And so that's what I really like about what he's trying to do, because there's just a lot of, a really great book about this type of thing is by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind, where he basically says that these really deep held beliefs, that if you go straight after the beliefs, the natural thing for the person is to recoil and to have cognitive bias and flag everything in their mind to reassure them of what they believe is true. Because it's really, really uncomfortable to have our core beliefs challenged, whether that be politics or our view of God or whatever.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's what, Capon is, really, going to try to hit at is, hey, I'm not here to dismantle your current belief system. I'm trying to reveal to you a world that you've never seen.
Do you feel in the current situation of the church, the proper presentation of the gospel is being made? Let's ask an uncomfortable question.
Yeah,
I know you don't want to.
Yeah. To the guy who's still in a church.
That doesn't mean the churches aren't good. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about your church. I'm talking about generically as we oversee it. Is the gospel be presented?
I would say just the way society is certainly portrayed is not. There are obviously really good churches out there that are doing it, but from across the board, and I can only speak of my tradition, which is the evangelical tradition.
Sure.
The answer to that would be no. We are it appears at a general side that we're very focused on, like you talk about, programs in which we can get people to enter, and we want to display the message in a way that, that would be enticing for them to hear it, instead of realizing that, especially in our really internet world, is anyone can go online and listen to any sermon they want. If they really wanted to do that, they're probably not going to walk into a church to begin with. They're just going to Google Joel Osteen or whoever if they want to listen to a sermon.
Right.
And so I think the big thing is that whether at our work, that's one of the greatest places, because we are around people approximately 8 hours a day, and we get to know them, and that's a great discipleship field right there.
Absolutely, it is.
Because these people that
it's not, though, if you don't know the gospel. And I'm not talking like, Jesus died on the cross for your sins, and now you can go to heaven. I guess that's the gospel, it is, but it's like a 2-year-old's version of a gospel. What we're talking about is the in-depth power of what God has brought back to this earth,
right? And
in the scope of what He's done, that is so deep that it rearranges and changes minds, hearts, and lives. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but think of change in itself. Like how many religious people changed their beliefs? How many liberals changed to Republicans? Republicans changed. People don't change, is my point. They think they do, but they're more creatures of habit, creatures of core beliefs instilled by whatever system they've been coming through.
Yep.
It's sort of like the old saying, like, we build our buildings and then they build us. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think this is what makes Capon so powerful here, is he does understand the gospel, and it makes her think. It makes her pause. It makes her even go, wow, it's not for these simpletons who are just fat and eat a lot and sing, Jesus culture songs or whatever, or these people that are academically lazy or whatever, whatever, camp we put people in. Capon actually makes them stop and pause beyond what they're particularly knowledgeable in, and enter into a place of, at least, should I put my faith here? You know what I mean? And I love that. And I think this is why we spend so much time on topics like this, on this book like this, because when we don't understand the gospel, then what are we proclaiming? And if we're proclaiming a system of beliefs and thoughts, then we're inviting them into the system more than into what God is doing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what he's trying to do there. He says over and over, I'm not trying to get you into my church. I'm not trying to get you into my pastorate or this whatever. But he says, I'm just looking at the screen right here. One of the things that I have highlighted is when it comes to the gospel, a lot of people don't know it, including a lot of preachers, he says. And he says they think it's some kind of religious recipe for getting their act together. So what he's talking about is behavior. He's talking about moralism.
Right. And
it's almost, isn't that what systems are? They're patterns of behavior. Even if you're like an assemblyman, the system of assembly is patterns of things that happen in order to get an equal outcome. You know what I'm saying? And you control that outcome if the system is in place, is a good system in place.
Right.
And I think that's what he's sort of getting at. And he goes beyond that. He goes, because most people think of religion only when there's a problem. It's for solving problems. It's for straightening up, get things right. I got to pick myself up by my bootstraps, and I can't do it, so therefore I need God. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, what do you want to say? I can see you jumping in there.
No, I was just thinking of examples, in my head where, one of the real prominent ones is when people have their first kid and they haven't been going to church for years and years. And what do they, what's kind of a typical thing? They want to put the kid, in church so that they get raised on good beliefs.
Yeah. And they want them to be morally correct, whatever that means. But what's interesting is that moral game, he doesn't call that a Bible game. He calls that the world. Which, think about that, man. Like, that's a powerful statement. Like, if you asked me, I do think people take, the notorious from your 20s or your 19 to 25. A lot of kids don't go to church anymore.
Right.
Now it's just blown out of the water.
Sure.
But back in the day. But, then they go, well, they come back once they get married, that kind of thing. At least when I was pastoring here in town, that's one of the things that I heard all the time. They'll come back once they have kids. Because why? They want the kids to grow up with their belief system. They want them to grow up with the right behaviors.
Yeah.
But really, what are they learning? They're learning some things about Bible. They're learning about some things about theology, right? And we hope at some point there's a contact trace of God in this. But really, they learn a system. They do learn a system. And, I've seen even in this ministry here at One Church, where we have missional communities, we have people coming into the neighborhood, I've seen the biggest people that have a problem with what we do are the ones that are caught in the system and don't know how to live outside the system, and therefore don't understand freedom. They only feel right within the system, but not within the world. They don't read to get to know God. They don't talk to others in order to be part of their lives. It would have to be somewhere involved in that system.
Yeah. Oh, you're going to get me on a rant here.
Let me hear it, man.
No, that's so true. And I'm just going to start off of what you just said recently, that they don't, read to know God. That's yeah. As you know, church in its initial formulation was always meant to be this communal group of people who got together for encouragement, to grow in. They were together to participate in life together with God.
Yeah.
And to be on mission with him and what he's doing. And unfortunately, over time, what's ended up happening is the church has ended up morphing away from this communal life to, like you said, the system of beliefs. And it ends up churning out to where people don't go to church to be a part of a community and a family. They go to church to, be indoctrinated. Not in a negative sense, but to have.
What do you mean by indoctrinated?
Have beliefs be presented to them. And so it's basically coming to them with, quote unquote, an empty mind of their view toward God and saying, you have all the answers, present them to me and I will absorb them. And I'm curious enough that I'm going to come back week after week after week.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm saying is that, churches end up morphing away from its original intention, which is the simple gathering of people who want to participate in doing life together with God and to be there for mutual encouragement, all that growing together. And here's the amazing thing is it's been proven time and time again in the history. If you read, the early church fathers and stuff, is these beliefs and everything that people are seeking after, that's going to be a byproduct. It's going to happen. But the problem is we end up staying at the belief level. And I think so much of that is going to, is resonated, back with Rene Descartes and everything, this I think, therefore I am. So the rational creature is the most important, idea of truth. And so in order for us to know what truth is, I have to get my beliefs in order instead of getting, letting God work on my heart toward him.
I think that's absolutely true. And the reason why discipleship in America just sucks, and I just hate it does. It sucks. It's hardly there. They think preaching is the same thing as discipling.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why it's there is because there's a lack of understanding the gospel. It's not that there's a lack of understanding the Bible within the context of the denomination that you're in. In other words, their theology.
Yeah.
But people fail to see, like if you read Paul, well, if I just read like, I don't know, Galatians, for example, what you'll see is he's definitely pissed off at a bunch of people that have turned their back on the gospel.
Yeah.
But you don't get an explanation of that gospel itself. You get explanation of sort of what it should be, but not a clear explanation, like, for example, in Romans. But here's my point in saying that. But if you read Paul's writings as a whole, right, what you do see is everything that he's talking about is in comparison or contrived through what Jesus has done, the gospel, that through the manifestation of the incarnation, if you will. And why I'm saying that is we tend to forget that when we're reading these things, and we go towards the system again.
Right.
We fall back into rules and well, he did say, women shouldn't talk in church. Therefore, I'm going to create a system that says, which that's my first number one, women don't talk in church. You know what I mean? And it's like, wait a second. I don't think you're getting the whole thing there. You're taking this little piece of a passage and you're creating an entire system out of it.
Sure.
And then you're not saying it, but you're propagating a system that says, well, if you don't believe like that, you're wrong. And you can't be part of this community.
Yeah.
And in that case, we could get into this, but like how many women have been not treated properly in the church.
Sure.
When in truth, you and I know we've been in church, most of the women are what's running the church. You know what I mean? Because the guys just won't step up.
Yeah. I remember I read a book by this brilliant person named D.L. Mayfield, and she
read my book.
Yeah. But she starts at the beginning of her book that she became a missionary to Africa because the church told her that she was basically good enough to preach the gospel to foreigners, but not to their own people.
Yeah, that's nice. Freaking idiots, man. I know I'm a missionary and I'm whatever, but that just kind of stuff just is just so disturbing to me. It's not to deconstruct the church. It's just saying, you're not reading this thing to know God. You're coming into this to present another set of laws, another set of rules. This is what he's getting at. And I want to get to I guess we got like 15 minutes. He starts getting in, she's feeling guilt, right? So he's presenting the gospel to her. This is what we're getting into. And he starts talking to her about how the parables and the gospel, it's sort of what we're saying here, is really to show you what God is like, what he's doing, and that most people are getting it wrong. It's not just the sinners, it's that we're all sinners. So yes, it is the sinners, but see, religious people exclude themselves. They call themselves forgiven sinners. But, and they are, but they really mean, I think, my attitude towards that is, I think they really don't really think they sin. Of course, they make a mistake here and there, Chris, but they don't see themselves as broken, sinful beings that if Jesus walked in the room would be the tax collectors. If their hearts were right before God, they would not be like, well, I thank God I'm not like the tax collector. You know what I mean? And he gets into this whole, he gets into the prodigal son. He gets into all these parables that are really showing what this good news is and how God has given this whole thing and all of its treasures that come from this gospel to everyone that is in him, which you love that term, in him now, right? But she can't get over this guilt. So when she starts talking about her guilt, like where are you on that in the scope of what he's saying?
Well,
how do you view that guilt in terms of gospel?
Well, I would say, what Capon is going to get at when it comes to this idea of guilt. So just as a backdrop to it, the guilt that she's feeling is that she didn't come home when he was sick. They decided that she was going to stay at this conference. And not only that, she ends up staying an extra day at her friend's house. Mm-hmm. And so she could have come home at any point. So she, didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to do, that normal stuff. So she's feeling guilty that she was being selfish in her decision.
Right.
And so what this guilt ends up doing is it is becoming a roadblock to her experiencing forgiveness, because she can't forgive herself for what she's done. And then out of that, because can't forgive herself, you can't just harbor up blame on yourself. Typically it ends up bouncing off to other people, and in this case, the doctors.
So then now we're back into this negligence thing.
Yeah.
She's looking to place blame because she can't deal with the reality of her own guilt.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you think, why is this so important to would you see this as a gospel opportunity?
I think Capon shows that it is.
Yeah, I know, but I'm asking, if me and you were sitting at the coffee shop talking to somebody, would we see that as a gospel opportunity? And I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I probably not. I think I would be caught up too much on the details and what they're saying.
Right, and behavior. Mm-hmm. And he's not caught up on any of that. That's what makes him, he sees it for what it is, but he sees it through the lens of the gospel. And therefore can talk about faith and talk about, why do you think, in your view of understanding her guilt, why it's so detrimental to him when it comes to him trying to explain the gospel? Like, he basically says, like, you're backing into a cliff. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think that meant? Where do you see that cliff as being?
Well, I think it's an allusion back to early in his book on unforgiveness, that guilt is the mirage, so to speak, of her unforgiveness of herself, her unforgiveness of her husband, the unforgiveness toward the doctors. And so guilt is preventing her from being able to see clearly what the situation is.
Yes, and it's also, I think, I agree with that 100%. But what I started to see in this, tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm reading too much into it, but I started to see, like, guilt's not only, like, preventing her from, what'd you say, like, seeing things clearly. It's literally keeping her from even, what do you mean by seeing things clearly? Like, explain what you mean by it, because I know what I think, but what do you think?
What I'm saying is that the guilt becomes the focus of her attention, and it ends up blinding her to the real issues going on. Yeah,
and so I see that the real issue is lack of faith. The real issue is there is no faith in her life other than what she's what her home behavior has dictated. Mm-hmm. In other words, she went to school, she put her faith in college and became a all these, a science and all this stuff, right? She's putting her faith there, but when it comes to God, her faith is it's like a world that she hasn't walked in, which is true, because the only way to walk in that world is faith. And so that's what I see, that guilt is keeping her from even understanding the gospel or walking towards that world of faith that she needs to be in. Now, why do you think Capon is so adamant about understanding forgiveness?
I think the issue that he sees with forgiveness is, for me to kind of summarize the best way I can, when you have this unforgiveness that's going on, it causes you to focus your attention away from what God has done to the issue that you're unable to let go. And so what ends up happening is that if you're unable to forgive in this situation, the idea of God forgiving becomes an absurdity. Right.
I'm going to go a little different. You're not wrong, but I have a friend. He used to go to ISU, Indiana State University. I won't say his name, but he was a student. He had a great, Radon. Radon and that crew really worked with him, helped him. They discipled him, and he was like a poet, rapper. Okay. And then all of a sudden he got involved in African American studies and social justice issues. Now, the problem I have with like CRT or BLM is not that I don't care about my fellow man, which I do, is when you get into these social justice issues, there's one thing that I've noticed that I don't think he recognizes. And that is, in social justice issues, what is justice? All right, justice is getting what's due or owned to me, right? But justice, can you have justice without forgiveness? And my answer to that is no. You cannot ever have justice without forgiveness. And therefore, you can never move on. And that's the problem with these social justice issues that I see. Not to get political, but this is what happens when you remove theology from the other sciences. When you remove God from school, because you can't, grace means nothing then. And then there's no reason to have things like grace, which give you forgiveness. And that forgiveness gives you the ability to move forward. And so what I see in these political issues of our day, which are really, right in front of our faces now, is that there is no real justice. There's only what's due to me, and then there's no forgiveness. So justice can never, ever be had. Do you get what I'm saying? It can never be accomplished because it'll never end. So like racism will never end, so therefore there can be no justice. And therefore we have to go back all these years and figure out why the systems are in place that are all racist, blah, blah, blah. And there's no ability to move forward. The privileged people will always be that, and these people will always be this group, and there's no ability for them to move forward. And this is the problem with Mabel here, is because she's caught in a world of guilt, she can't forgive and therefore can never move forward. There is no healing to be had.
Right.
There is no salvation to be won. There is no justice that will be big enough. Even if she thinks she gets a small victory of the doctors, what Capon is really pointing out is like that'll never heal the wound of your guilt.
Right.
It will never give you salvation from this situation, and you will never move forward. You will always be a prisoner to that. And what grace offers is this freedom, and some of it hits us, it slaps us right in life. Like there are times where we need to find healing, but that healing comes by forgiving those who don't even want to be forgiven, who might cause you grief, but they have you pinned as a prisoner because of grief, because of unforgiveness, because of bitterness, and I really feel like that's what he's really getting at here. Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah. For her situation, absolutely. It's in order for her to even to receive the basic fundamentals of the gospel, she has to get into this realm of forgiveness. And that's what I think,
her grief is calling for justice.
Right.
And her justice is a false claim.
Right.
Right? It doesn't matter if the lawyers say, there's nothing here.
Right.
All she has to hear is somebody telling her that it might be a good idea. It's like I saw this at church all the time. People would come up. I'd say, I need prayer. Will you pray for me? Sure. And they would go to every different person and they would look for like a word from God.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? And so they'd come to you, Chris, and you would pray for them, and you didn't give them the word they wanted. Well, thank you for praying, but I'm going to go to Joe over here. Well, Joe would pray for them, didn't get the word they wanted, and then they'd go to Susie, and then and they're just looking until somebody gives them the word that they want, and then they go, oh, God spoke today. And I would watch this all the time in Pentecostalism, and I'd watch this in evangelical, and I think this is very much like that. When the hurts come, we don't look for healing through the gifts that God has given us through the gospel, because we don't think they're powerful tools. We think there's something we control. Do you know what I mean? Like forgiveness is not just a thing that we decide to do. It's an accomplishment of a cross that we did not do, that we need from the power of God and the Holy Spirit in our hearts and lives and in this temple. So this is what, you asked me how I thought about this temple. This is where this sort of hits me hard, because I can hold a grudge.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Everyone can, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to move on from those things. What do you want to say?
No, I was just gonna say, I had that kind of, that experience, even to myself, that, I was out, walking earlier, and I just kind of had that kind of thought too of, oh my gosh, like I, ended up putting a wall around this and calling it forgiveness, but I haven't really forgiven them, forgiven the person. And, it was definitely hard, but, the only thing I could do at that point was to, accept my forgiveness of them as best as I can, and then to pray God's blessing over them.
Yeah, like I'm an athlete. Like I played.
Right.
You are too. I mean, back in the day, I played 3 sports, all state, played baseball. But my point in saying that is, like, when I have somebody I don't like, I don't want to see them do well. I want to see them destroyed.
Yeah.
I do, man. Like when I was in karate, if somebody limped, you can bet that I was going to kick that limp. If they were hurting in their arm, I was going to hit that arm. If their ear was hurting, I was going to slap that ear. If I'm playing basketball, I'm going to step on that foot. If I'm playing football, I'm going to poke that eye. That's the way I learned to play. You know what I mean? And we tend to do that passive aggressively in real life relationships. You know what I mean? But really, what made me reflect on this chapter was the parts of my heart that I look for a reason. It's like Michael Jordan would look for reasons to get pissed off so he would play harder. I do that. I have that in me. Yeah. I'm not Michael Jordan. I'm just saying, like, I'll look for that weakness so I can use it.
Yeah.
And I think we can do that. I think it prevents true healing and love.
Yeah, and of course, that goes into what's going on with Mabel too. Is she is guilty over the fact that she wasn't there for her husband, but if she can prove medical malpractice or whatever, then she's justified in her anger towards something else.
Right, it proves what she's feeling.
Right, and that's what I think what was really interesting, and I thought it was great. Obviously, it says that she came back for a second session and then seemed to never come back again. But one thing he did I thought was really good was his homework he gave her was just the simple thing of...
Which was? Go ahead, hit it. We got like 5 minutes left. So
it was just, one, anytime you're feeling, anytime you're feeling guilty about the situation, do not go to any of your friends. Do not try to seek justification for your actions. Don't try to seek, the gloaty party or whatever. Like, if you really got to struggle, come to me. Let's just keep this between you and me, so that it doesn't end up further consuming your life.
Right.
And the second thing is that he wanted to practice, just basic, forgiveness and acceptance of.
Right. And what do you think he did that for?
It's to get those walls to begin to break down because he presented, I think it was a fire hose of information to someone who's not a believer, of information he gave her. Well, especially if she doesn't have much information of church, he's just floodgate, parable says this, parable says, there's just a lot of information people aren't used to hearing, terms and things like that. But let me finish with this real quick, that instead of him going to her and saying, here's a full step process of what you need to do to, to get encounter with God. I've been talking to you about this forgiving God. Why don't you maybe try to step into that and see what happens?
And you're only going to get the healing you need if you take that little small step of faith. Yeah,
and my natural inclination, I think like most people too, just from a lot of my evangelical upbringing and everything else, is before you leave this room, like before you start on this path of healing, first thing you need to do is intellectually believe that Jesus is God and he died for you. Let's get your intellectual mind in order first, and then the healing can begin. And because again, like I've said before, we want to know who's in and who's out. We got to get this set in point, black and white, instead of going, God, I trust you with this. The most important thing for her to do is to begin to let down some of this resentment, or she will never begin to hear who you really are. And I need to just let that go and leave her with that information.
That is a great point. And the detriment is her soul. She doesn't realize the cliff is that she will never walk into faith in God and the healing and salvation that he offers, because she's holding on to her grief and won't walk into forgiveness. Do you think forgiveness is a big thing talked about in the Bible?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others.
Yeah. Think about that.
Yeah, and there's even a caveat, I think, in Matthew that, Jesus adds on that God will not forgive you unless you forgive others.
Yeah, I was going to, I'm looking at, look at this. I'm showing him my phone. Okay. I looked up the word forgiveness.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just in the New Testament.
Oh, sure.
I can't even begin to tell you how many passages this is. But it's literally, I mean, it's hundreds of passages. Mm-hmm. Think about, to the knowledge of salvation to his people, Jesus gives forgiveness of sins. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you. Go and forgive them first before coming to this altar.
Yeah.
Think about that. And then you read the Lord's prayer, which is, forgive them of their trespasses as
God's forgiven you.
Think about that.
Yeah, and just back to what we talked.
We don't think about that.
Well, I'm saying what we had talked about a few weeks ago with, in the Sermon on the Mount, that says that if your sacrifices are brought before and you realize that I think it's either you have something against your brother or your brother has something for you, leave the sacrifice and go reconcile with your brother, because forgiveness is more important. Think about, like in the prophets, it was a Hosea or whatever that says, I desire mercy over sacrifice.
Yeah. Think about that, man. Like that's what was starting to hit me as I'm realizing, like, the grudges, the guilt, the justice I want in those things. What we really want to get at is, to the heart of God's salvation comes forgiveness. And if you don't have his forgiveness, you're not able to forgive. And you're not able to come into the grace that he really has. And then therefore, you're actually just hurting yourself. And I guess you're accomplishing some worldly kind of justice, but it's definitely not godly. All right, man. Should we pick out a part 2 of this next week?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do this part 2 next week. Well, thank you for listening for the mystery of guilt. And what chapter is this, man?
7 and 8.
Yeah, so that was sort of 7's talk. We're going to get into what the crew says about this conversation next year, which I know you have a lot to say about that. We want to thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. And subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. Remember, the mystery of guilt is really about the gift of grace and forgiveness. Till next time, we will see you back on Inference Swap. So we will say bye later.